Number 1.
Barton planned to go to the movies with a friend in Austin, Texas on May 16, 1976. She was short of cash and stopped at a bar in the vicinity of East 11th Street and Waller Street to see if she could get some money there. She met two African American men inside the bar and spent half an hour talking to them. One of them is described as 5'4" with a thin build, wearing a sailor's cap and a t-shirt. The other was 5'6" with a heavy build and a large afro. Jennifer told a friend the men offered her $25 for sex. She decided to go with them. One man left via the back door, and the other went out the front door and got into a large brown or tan van. It had a large whip antenna, teardrop-shaped side windows, a spare wheel on the back, and California license plates. The van turned the corner, and the second man got inside it. One of Barton's friends was walking down the street at the time and saw the van go around the block and come back up the street. She looked into the van, but didn't see Barton. Barton has never been heard from again. Two other young African American women, Deborah Stewart and Brenda Moore, both disappeared from Austin in the spring of 1976, and it's possible the three cases are related. Stewart was not a prostitute, but she did frequent the 11th Street area, like Barton did, and the two women had friends and acquaintances in common. Moore vanished on March 7, 1976. She was last seen at 3:15 p.m. on the east side of Austin. On March 12, her car was found abandoned in the 1900 block of Coletto Street, less than a block from where Stewart's vehicle was later located, with the car keys inside it. Photographs of Moore are unavailable. She was 19 years old at the time of her disappearance and is described as 5'0" tall and 125 pounds with black hair and brown eyes. She worked as a nurse's aide and had a history of depression. Moore was married at the time of her disappearance, but she and her husband had been separated for about 4 months and she had a boyfriend who drove a blue Chevrolet pickup truck. Her husband said he thought she had simply left town with another man. There is no hard evidence that Moore, Barton, and Stewart's disappearances are connected, but police are looking into the possibility. Barton was raised in an upper-middle-class family and was well behaved as a child, but she dropped out of Reagan High School in her senior year and began dating a man who was a drug dealer and a pimp. After her boyfriend was imprisoned, she started using heroin and became a prostitute. In February 1976, her pimp was murdered in a robbery gone bad at an Austin hotel. There were rumors that Barton had set him up, and she was afraid that his friends would come after her. Shortly after the murder, Barton's apartment was broken into and vandalized. Obscene pictures and words were painted in red on the wall, and someone pinned her underwear to the wall and wrote blood nearby. It's unclear whether the murder of Barton's pimp and the subsequent break-in at her apartment are connected to her later disappearance. Barton had made comments about wanting to go to California, and police looked for her in the Los Angeles area, but their searches turned up nothing. She has a record for robbery, assault and prostitution, but she has not been arrested since her 1976 disappearance. She is considered endangered, and foul play is suspected in her case.
Number 2.
Beltran was last seen leaving Bell Bottoms nightclub in the 8400 block of Grapevine Highway in North Richland Hills, Texas at approximately 1 a.m. on September 9, 2000. She was accompanied by Mario Alberto Prieto, who was also known as Dr. Luis Prieto, Spartacus Roberts and Mario Lopez at the time. A photo of Prieto is posted with this case summary. Beltran has never been heard from again. She did not know Prieto and had met him for the first time the night of her disappearance. Authorities believe that Beltran accompanied Prieto to his residence at Bear Creek Apartments in the 2000 block of State Highway 360 in Euless, Texas during the early morning hours of September 9. Investigators believe that Prieto may have assaulted Beltran afterwards. Evidence of a violent confrontation, including bloodstains which someone had tried to clean up, was discovered inside of his apartment, and almost all of Pietro's personal belongings were gone. Neighbors reported hearing a woman screaming at 2 a.m. the day of Beltran's disappearance. One neighbor also claims to have seen Pietro removing a rancid-smelling box from his apartment on September 10. Pietro allegedly declined the neighbor's offer of assistance with the box, which appeared to be heavy. Investigators learned that Prieto was driving a stolen 2000 Ford Expedition and staying in a San Antonio, Texas motel on September 11, 2000. Officers pursued Prieto, who rammed his vehicle into several other cars before stopping alongside the highway. Prieto got out the vehicle while holding a gun to his head. Police shot him to death after he pointed the gun at them. His weapon turned out to be a BB gun. He had a criminal record for theft, but no known history of violent offenses. Authorities were unable to locate any evidence as to Beltran's whereabouts after Pietro's death, but DNA testing determined that the blood found in Pietro's apartment was hers. Foul play is suspected in her disappearance. Beltran was employed as an au pair, or live-in nanny, in South Lake, Texas in 2000. She had resided with her host family since February of that year and had moved with them from Virginia to Texas. She planned to improve her English before moving back to Peru to start a teaching career.
Number 3.
Emmanuel was abducted from his home in Dallas, Texas on September 14, 1989, by an unidentified female under false pretenses. His abductor claimed to be a social worker named Deborah Manning, who first visited his home he shared with his grandmother, Hermaine Grady, and his mother, Kisha Birts, on August 12. She claimed she was making a follow-up home visit from the hospital. She told them that Emmanuel had an eye infection, which was actually true. The woman visited the residence once again on September 12, a month later, and 2 days before Emmanuel's abduction. She claimed that it was possible Emmanuel had the HIV virus. This was considered plausible since Kisha was known to use drugs during her pregnancy. The woman showed up a day later on September 13, this time with a letter she said was from Child Welfare Department. According to the letter, Emmanuel was required to go to the hospital to get tested for the HIV and said she needed to take the baby immediately. Kisha wanted to come with them to the hospital, but Manning made up an excuse as to why he couldn't come. She said she'd come to pick him up the next morning. Deborah came the next morning on September 14 to pick up the baby. Kisha also left the home and went to Parkland Memorial Hospital to ask about her baby's health. Emmanuel was at home with Grady at the time. When Deborah first arrived, she claimed she had to go and get a baby seat. She said she would be back in an hour. She did in fact return, and Grady gave the baby to her at 10 a.m. Deborah didn't take Emmanuel's eye medication with her, but she promised to be back by 2 p.m. She never came back and the baby was never seen or heard from again afterwards. His family reported his abduction at 8 p.m. that night when she still hadn't returned. His parents were both subsequently tested for the HIV virus, and the results came back as negative. This meant that Emmanuel never actually had the virus in the first place. His parents were also both administered to polygraph examinations and passed. They are not considered suspects in his abduction. Emmanuel's abductor is described as being African American and was in her 30s at the time of the abduction. She stood at 5'63" and weighed approximately 145 pounds. She had sandy brown-colored hair, but it's been stated this might have been a wig she was wearing. She was also noted to be wearing heavy blue eyeshadow. She also had a foreign accent which may have been of African origin. She did claim to own a van, but his family members don't recall seeing any vehicle whatsoever. Investigators believe the name Deborah Manning was most likely an alias name. There was an actual welfare worker by that name whom Grady did know at the time. Child Protective Services never authorized anyone to take Emmanuel from his home for any reason at all. It was noted that the unidentified woman always wore a white lab coat and surgical pants. Normal social workers wear normal street cloths. Due to the nature of the crime, investigators believe that Emmanuel's abductor might have a history as a con artist. She also had access to his medical records, which adds into this theory or possibility. Apparently, Emmanuel was not the only infant abducted from Texas at the time. On May 18, 1990, a baby named Davian Jamal Hughes was abducted from his mother's hospital room in the Baylor Medical Center in Waxahachie, Texas. He was taken by a woman who posed as a family friend. The woman eventually turned herself into police and returned the baby. She took the baby to compensate for her baby she lost to a miscarriage. There's no evidence she's connected to Emmanuel's abduction. At the time of his abduction, Emmanuel lived in the 2900 block of East Ledbetter Drive with his mother and grandmother. He was born at the home but spent several days at Parkland Memorial Hospital after his birth. There's been no sign of Emmanuel since 1989, and his abductor remains unidentified. His abduction remains unsolved, and his current whereabouts remain a mystery. It's possible he's alive and doesn't know his status as a missing child.
Number 4.
Eitan disappeared from Plano, Texas on February 28, 2008. He was abducted by his non-custodial father, Michael Gary Blasingame. Photographs and vital statistics for Michael are posted below this case summary. He and Eitan's mother, Diana Hewen, agreed to share custody after the child's birth. Michael was supposed to return Eitan to his mother's care on March 18, 2008, but he never showed up. A felony warrant was issued for him on November 3, 2008. Photos of Michael are posted with this case summary. His date of birth is July 3, 1982, making him 25 years old at the time of Eitan's abduction. He's described as biracial, of Asian and Caucasian descent, 6'0" and 170 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. Michael has multiple tattoos, including one around his left wrist and up his forearm, and a Star of David on his right shoulder. Photos of his tattoos are posted with this case summary. His nickname is Mike, and he may use the following alias names: Tommy Bearden, Andy Michael Davis, Mike Leonard and/or Tim Rothschild. Michael speaks English, French and Chinese. He may have a beard and mustache and may wear hats or eyeglasses to disguise himself. He smokes cigarettes. Authorities determined that Michael took his son to various foreign countries after the abduction, including Ethiopia, Germany, Malaysia, Mexico, Thailand and Yemen. The last sighting of them was in October 2009 at a hospital in Malacca, Air Karo, Malaysia. There is concern for Eitan's safety, as Michael has threatened to harm his son and himself if Eitan's mother should try to locate them. He has no prior criminal record. Michael grew up in Lafayette, Louisiana, where he attended Lafayette High School for a short time before being homeschooled. He was reportedly involved in a gang in Lafayette. He attended a small college and Christian seminary in Dallas, Texas, where he met Hewen. She stated he attended a Chinese church before they dated. After she became pregnant with Eitan, Michael became interested in Judaism, began learning Hebrew, and said he wanted to convert and move to Israel. Michael spent a lot of time on the internet and met people, mostly translators, in many different countries. After he met a translator from Madagascar, he traveled there with Hewen and Eitan, and they stayed for a time in the translator's home before Eitan got sick and Hewen decided to take him back to the United States. Michael once owned a cyber cafe and also tried to set up several online business, but all his ventures failed and left him in debt. He enjoys country music, particularly Garth Brooks and Keith Urban. In April 2009, over a year after Eitan's abduction, Michael posted messages on his own MySpace page, taunting Hewen and investigators. This was the last communication with him. Authorities believe Michael has been in contact with people in the Lafayette area and the Dallas, Texas area since Eitan's abduction. Hewen feels the same way and filed a civil lawsuit against the Blasingame family, alleging they assisted Michael in the abduction. His family denies helping Michael or knowing his whereabouts. In July 2010, Michael's mother, Renee Blasingame, was arrested and charged with custodial interference in Eitan's case. Investigators think she helped her son and grandson in their flight and sent them money to finance their travels. Michael and Eitan may be in Lafayette, Louisiana. The child's whereabouts are unknown and his case remains unsolved. Caution is advised when approaching Michael. He should be considered armed and dangerous.
Number 5.
Blodgett resided in Post, Texas in 1993. She lived with her boyfriend, Jerry T. Smith, before receiving an order of protection against him that year. Witnesses said that Smith physically abused Blodgett on several occasions. He continued to visit her at her house regardless of the orders against him. Blodgett was last seen near her residence on June 2, 1993. A witness told authorities that she was seen walking along a dirt road off of US Highway 84 northwest of Post later during the day. She has never been heard from again. Several unconfirmed sightings of her in the area afterwards included one account of an elderly woman fitting her description who appeared unkempt and had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The unidentified woman claimed that she was traveling to Amarillo, Texas. It is not known if the individual was Blodgett. Texas Department of Mental Health and Mental Retardation employees were unable to locate Blodgett and reported her as a missing person on June 14, 1993. Her family members said that it is uncharacteristic of her to leave without warning. Blodgett normally tended her garden at home and also walked to several local businesses on a daily basis. No one recalled seeing Blodgett after June 2. Smith was charged with forgery after he attempted to cash a $100 check from Blodgett's bank account later in June 1993. He was convicted in 1995 and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Authorities charged Smith with Blodgett's homicide later in 1995. A witness testified that Smith told him he murdered Blodgett in Texas, then departed for a short trip to Arkansas in early June 1993. The witness claimed that Smith said he buried her body in a 55-gallon drum, then packed soil around the container. The individual stated that Smith poured high-octane gasoline over the drum and ignited it, claiming he believed the process would destroy Blodgett's bones and any evidence of her murder. Smith had a history of abuse prior to his relationship with Blodgett. His former wife told authorities that she filed for divorce in the early 1980s after Smith beat her severely. He pleaded guilty to assaulting his father in 1985. He was convicted of Blodgett's murder in 1996 and sentenced to life in prison. He continued to maintain his innocence throughout his trial. Blodgett's former home was damaged during a fire in January 2000, nearly 7 years after her disappearance. A construction worker discovered a bone fragment among the debris during the cleaning process later that summer. Some people speculated that the fragment was part of Blodgett's remains, but investigators stated that it was likely an animal bone. Blodgett's body has never been recovered.
Number 6.
Booth was last seen at the Dimensions nightclub, a disco club popular with local young adults, in the 400 block of Air Park Road in Midland, Texas on February 2, 1980. She was partying there with friends. She has never been heard from again. She left her purse, shoes and coat inside the nightclub. Temperatures outside were below freezing, and authorities believe Booth would not have left the building willingly without her coat or shoes, unless she was only planning to be gone a short time. One of Booth's male friends, Ron Fehringberg, dropped her off at the club and left, driving Booth's maroon and white 1975 or 1977 AMC Pacer. Booth was discovered missing at 11 p.m. when Fehringberg returned to pick her up and couldn't find her. She was not reported missing for 5 days, however. Booth's vehicle was located, abandoned approximately 1 to 1.5 miles south of Highway 20 on SH 349, Rankin Highway, on February 4, 2 days after she was last seen. It had been driven 268 miles that could not be accounted for. Fehringberg was considered a suspect in her disappearance, but he passed a polygraph test. Booth is a graduate of Lee High School, where she was involved in several extracurricular activities, including the Art Club and Future Homemaking of America. At the time of her disappearance, she lived with her parents and siblings in the 4400 block of Monty Avenue and worked as a cocktail waitress at the Great Gatsby, a now-defunct restaurant on Cuthbert Avenue. She was not having any problems at home at the time she went missing. The Dimensions nightclub closed in the early 1980s. Fehringberg is now deceased. Foul play is suspected in Booth's disappearance.
Number 7.
Tina Louise Bowen, 18, resided at 517 Silverdale in Conroe, Texas. In the early hours of July 14, 1997, Tina spoke with her boyfriend on the phone. Around 3:34 a.m., her mother spoke with her as she was going to bed. At 9 a.m., her mother checked on Tina, but the teen was gone. Friends of Tina's would sometimes knock on her window at night, and she would go outside to talk with them. It is believed that someone known to her did just that, and she went outside or left her home voluntarily to meet them. All of Tina's belongings, including her purse, were still in her room at her family home. At the time, her boyfriend was considered a suspect after failing a polygraph test. However, Tina's family does not believe he harmed her. Honestly, it is kind of hard to believe the person responsible for Tina's disappearance is anyone other than her boyfriend. Other than her mother, he was the last known person to talk with her before she disappeared. But I guess you could say the same about her mother, because she was the last known person to see Tina, although I do not believe she is responsible. Tina's mother last saw her around 3:30 to 4 a.m. in her room. Tina was gone by 9 a.m. So, we have a 5 to 5.5 hour time frame, but I think Tina disappeared soon after her mother went to bed. I agree with the police. Someone knocked on her window, and she went outside to meet them. Maybe she left with this person, or something happened to her in this person's vehicle. Or it is possible she spoke with someone on the phone and left to meet them somewhere, running into foul play along the way, or when she arrived at her destination. There is no public info on the boyfriend that I could find. There isn't a lot of info on this case, but I wanted to write about her case when I saw Tina's picture. She was so pretty and full of life, a typical teenager. It angers me to think someone took that away.
Number 8.
Brawner was last seen at his home on McLean Street in Shepherd, Texas on June 10, 2008. He has never been heard from again. His family reported him missing in mid-June after his sons went to his house for Father's Day and found the house locked and deserted. Brawner left behind his van, his medicine, his cigarettes, and clothes in the washing machine at home. There were no indications that a struggle had taken place. His relatives stated he couldn't have gotten very far on foot because he had so much trouble walking. They describe him as a reclusive person. He has few friends and wasn't close to his family. His son had not seen him in years prior to his disappearance. Stephen Ray Fester, a neighbor and friend of Brawner, is considered a person of interest in his case. A photo of him is posted with this case summary. After Brawner's disappearance, Fester connected his own trailer to Brawner's electricity. He also had a key to Brawner's house. It would be uncharacteristic of Brawner to give one to another person. Police searched Fester's home and found Brawner's .380 semi-automatic pistol inside it. He was ultimately indicted for stealing the gun and forging Brawner's signature on 4 personal checks, which he cashed in the days following Brawner's disappearance. They totaled $650. He claimed Brawner gave him the checks and gun. Fester was sentenced to probation for the charge and maintains his innocence in Brawner's disappearance. In 2011, he was convicted of a series of armed robberies and sentenced to 22 years in prison. Brawner's disappearance remains unsolved. Authorities believe he was taken against his will, and his family members think he's probably deceased.
Number 9.
Tara Suzette Breckenridge grew up in Del Rio, Texas, and moved to Houston after high school to pursue a career in photography. Del Rio is 152 miles west of San Antonio and about 6 hours away from Houston. Tara was working as a waitress at an adult entertainment club and had finished a shift there the night she disappeared. It was in the early hours of August 4, 1992, that Tara was last seen. It was a slow night, so Tara and another waitress volunteered to go home early. This was uncharacteristic of Tara. She was accompanied to her car by a security guard at the club, who stated to the police that she drove off without incident. Hours later, her car, a red 1986 Pontiac Fiero, was found abandoned and locked by her live-in boyfriend at the time, Wayne Hecker. The car was located around the 1200 block of West Loop North near 12th Street, on Tara's route home about 3 miles from the club. Strangely, a can of mace was left inside the car, which Tara always carried with her. This implies that she may have felt safe when she got out of the car or was taken against her will. However, there was no sign of a struggle. Neither the car alarm nor the flashers were on, and the car's alternator belt was found to be missing. Tara has never been found. There have been 2 main persons of interest in this case: a male admirer from the club and her boyfriend. The unidentified male admirer from the club would often leave her large tips and creepy notes telling her not to be scared and do what your heart tells you. Police interviewed this man and determined that he was merely attracted to Tara and nothing more. Her Unsolved page states that this man had intricate knowledge of her difficulties with Wayne and would frequently visit her at work. The other suspect was her boyfriend, Wayne Hecker. Their relationship was allegedly strained, and Tara had previously mentioned leaving him. Hecker stated that he was in a pool hall 15 minutes away from Tara's work when she would have left, and that he tried calling her earlier that evening, but did not reach her. Employees of the club where Hecker was claimed he left around midnight and returned around 1:45 a.m., so where did he go in that time? The Houston Cold Case website states that Hecker arrived home around 3:30 a.m. Doe Network says 5 a.m. after getting a ride with a friend and discovered Tara was not home. The friend and Hecker started to look for her and were the ones to discover her car at around 7 a.m. After this, Hecker called the police. Hecker maintained his innocence but died from cancer in 2015. Foul play is suspected in the incident, but since her disappearance, no trace of Tara has been found. Is the same individual responsible for Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson responsible for this crime? It's possible, but there has not been any compelling evidence to link the crimes. Unfortunately, both of Tara's parents have since passed away, and they list her as predeceasing them, despite never finding closure in this case.
Number 10.
Brooks was last seen at his family reunion on June 19, 1998. He played basketball with relatives, then borrowed his mother's house keys so he could take a shower at her home. He has never been heard from again. Brooks had a habit of dropping out of sight from time to time, but he always kept in touch with his family members. His loved ones reported him missing on January 31, 1999. Brooks' case was reopened in 2003. Investigators and Brooks' mother have received several anonymous tips about his alleged murder. The callers claimed Brooks was shot to death during a fight, and his body was either thrown into the Brazos River or buried in Orchard, Texas. Brooks was supposedly killed by one person, but several other people helped dispose of his remains. Brooks' cousin, Stephen Carrington, was living with him in a rural home on Johnson Road in Orchard at the time Brooks vanished. Carrington's 12-year-old stepdaughter, Teketria Buggs, disappeared from that same residence during the night of December 2, 2005. Her remains were found in the Brazos River on December 15. She had been strangled and stabbed to death. A photograph of Carrington are posted with this case summary. Carrington was arrested on unrelated domestic violence charges after Buggs' disappearance. While in jail, in mid-December 2005, he confessed to murdering Teketria and was subsequently charged with murder. Members of Carrington's family made statements to police which corroborated his story. Carrington's confession corresponded closely with the anonymous tips about Brooks' murder. He stated he shot Brooks in the head during an argument over money, wrapped his body in a blanket, and dumped it in the Brazos River, where Teketria was found. On the day of Teketria's funeral, he confessed to killing her as well and was charged with a second count of murder. In February 2008, Carrington pleaded guilty to Teketria and Brooks' murders and to the unrelated sexual assault of a juvenile relative. He was sentenced to 57 years in prison for Teketria's death, 40 years for the Brooks killing and 10 years for the sexual assault case. He will not be eligible for parole for nearly 30 years and will probably spend the remainder of his life in prison. Brooks attended B.F. Terry High School in Rosenberg, Texas, but dropped out before graduating. His remains have not been recovered, but foul play is suspected in his disappearance due to the circumstances involved.